my first day on the job. It was a big presentation that the police department gave.
How long did you expect?
We've got the whole day scheduled, and we don't know
what it was that they did.
After the presentation, the police commander seemed confident.
If I were the DA at this point, I would go ahead with a grand jury.
But DA Hutter still wasn't ready.
They have not made the decision to convene the grand jury.
Emotions ran high on both sides.
Over the course of 2 days, Steve Thomas and other detectives put forward everything they had.
Detective Steve Thomas ran a list of reasons why the Ramseys were under suspicion.
People who believed in the intruder theory, they believed it. On the other side, folks that thought it was somebody from inside the house, they said, let's charge him, let's indict somebody.
They felt that they had put forward enough to perhaps trigger the filing of charges, or at the very least, convening of a grand jury.
After it was all over, we all met, and Alex Hunter said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, you don't have a chargeable case right now." And it was like some people in that room were shocked.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. I wouldn't be surprised if District Attorney Alex Hunter told his prosecutors to be extra careful on this case and for the tough prosecutors to apply an extra level of rigor. Why? Because of the shadow of the O.J. Simpson trial. This business of sending a case to trial, failing to get a conviction, and then having that courtroom circus blasted onto televisions 24/7 across America's exploding television landscape. Remember, this was also the time of the 24-hour news cycle, which meant if you were in the news and if your news story was high profile, the pressure, the attention, the humiliation was going to be off the charts. Incidentally, if you still think the legacy of the O.J. trial was barely incidental to the Ramsey case, well, the district attorney actually recruited 2 investigators from O.J.'s dream team, Barry Scheck and Dr. Henry Lee, to advise him. Did you know that? Can I just say, since we're approaching the end of January, I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be covering the Ramsey case. I can't imagine I'll still be doing so in February. Meanwhile, there are plenty of other cases happening, including breaking news in the Amanda Knox legal saga. And I think the Ramsey case actually interrupted my analysis of that case. For right now, though, in this analysis, I want to share firstly my opinion on the split between the Boulder PD and the DA. What do I think about it? Who was right? Who was on the right track? Legally, what is the best position to take? But I also want to come back to one of the last points, one of the last of 17 points raised in that Midsummer Police presentation in 1998. You heard about that at the beginning of this episode. And that point was the fiber evidence on the sticky side of the duct tape placed over JonBenet's mouth. The police thought that that implicated the Ramseys. Were they right? Well, before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button and let's get started. So we're going to deal with 3 aspects related to that presentation, starting with number 1, the dream team whispered poisonous words. Now, again, you might think, well, okay, so what? Maybe the O.J. Simpson folk were part of the whole thing, but do you realize how much they were a part of it? Again, if you don't think the O.J. Simpson case had much of an impact, guess again. At least 2 members of O.J.'s dream team, and remember, these are defense experts, they argued in the minutes following the police investigation. I mean, they listened to it, they basically evaluated it, and they basically appraised it to Alex Hunter. And what did they say? We don't think it's a fileable case either. Let's go to Perfect Murder, Perfect Town by Lawrence Schiller dealing with this aspect. When the first officer arrived at the house, Patsy answered the door fully dressed, wearing the same jacket as the previous night and with her makeup on. Number 17. This is the pertinent one. Fibers from her jacket were found on the duct tape John Ramsey said he tore from JonBenet's mouth. Right? Fibers from Patsy's jacket were found on the duct tape, the sticky side, that John Ramsey tore from JonBenet's mouth. And then immediately after this, you had a Q&A session following the presentation. All the detectives sit at a table at the front of the room. Beckner was on one side. Dr. Lee, that's from the O.J. Simpson case, maintained his professional demeanor, but he looked frustrated. There was the sense that the police investigation seemed to have fallen short, had it? And so by the time Barry Scheck had to leave, Hunter's group was saying that it wasn't a fileable case. All of these people agreed. Lee, Scheck, and Hunter, and others. Number 2, the fiber evidence excluded the housekeeper and John Ramsey and even Patsy Ramsey, among others. Now think about that. Some people on my channel seem to firmly believe the housekeeper is guilty. Well, not according to the fiber evidence. Let's go back to Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. The police reported that they'd been unable to find a match for the fibers. These are dark fibers discovered on JonBenet's body, especially in kind of quite intimate areas. The fibers did not match any clothes belonging to John or Patsy. Quite interesting. And the police were stumped as a result of this. And this is important. Based on the fiber evidence, the detectives presented a long list of suspects who had now been dropped. Randy Simons, Bud Henderson, Linda Hoffman-Pugh, Joe Barnhill, and goes on and on. Number 3, but there was a match to some of the fiber evidence. The CBI had established that the 4 fibers found in the duct tape were consistent with the jacket Patsy wore to the White's house on Christmas, which Officer French observed she also had on the next morning. A photograph taken at the White showed Patsy in the jacket. That's a photograph we have never seen. The detectives were certain of this evidence and its importance. They considered it a match. Now, we've touched very lightly on the fiber narrative. If you feel we should go into it into more detail, we can, and I think we should. But if we're going to gloss through this area, I think it's important to look in a very global sense at this idea, just the idea of Patsy wearing the same clothes she wore at the White's dinner party. You know, she's a beauty queen. What were her habits? What kind of person was Patsy? Was this typical behavior? Is this very odd? Is this a sign of something hinky, right? And so we need to look at that and make a decision on what that means. Now, remember, we need to tread cautiously and carefully as we begin to wade into this tricky area, because
when one note is off, it eventually destroys the whole symphony, David.
Now, before we get to that, just to note that there are almost 6,000 posts on Patreon, of which around 500, almost 500, deal in depth with the Ramsey case. So if you're looking for the mother of all Ramsey rabbit holes, you should head to the $3 tier to get your answers. There really is a lot of top-notch content, analysis, and information from the widest variety of credible sources, authors, and documentaries. And so without any further ado, let's go to Patsy's clothing and look at 3 possibilities. Number 1, emotionally compromised. Whether or not Patsy was involved in JonBenet's death, either way, Patsy was emotionally compromised.
Jim, I just lost my planet. I can tell you, I am emotionally compromised.
But Patsy wasn't so emotionally compromised that she couldn't do her makeup and make herself presentable. Another aspect that I think one has to look at is this idea of, if Patsy wrote the note, was she capable, even though she was emotionally compromised, of acting in a certain way, despite all of that? And I think that is a very interesting question. But certainly if you say she was emotionally compromised, that could explain her clothing choice that night or that morning, right? Number 2, it means nothing. Another possibility is that the clothing choice means absolutely nothing. That, like the housekeeper's clothing choices that morning, or the pilot's or the gardener's, it's random and irrelevant. That's definitely a possibility. And then number 3, that they knew there would be fiber evidence, and so it's all about plausible deniability. In other words, that the dress code was deliberate. And it is definitely a quite interesting possibility, this third one, and troubling if it's true, which is that Patsy possibly anticipated the microscopic dimension to the case. Fingerprints on the ransom note, handwriting analysis of the ransom note, the need to disguise not only the handwriting but also the psychology of the ransom note. And then also fiber evidence. If you're going to think about this case in a microscopic way, the fiber evidence, and what allowed them that insight to be able to think about it, well, possibly the book Mindhunter, which was photographed on the scene. And so was that why she made it obvious what she was wearing, because she knew she wouldn't be able to mitigate the fiber, right, evidence. Now also remember, both John and Patsy did an amazing job of compromising the very heart of the crime scene. I mean, contaminating it by embracing JonBenet's body on the floor, on the carpet, in front of everyone, just after 1 o'clock on the day after Christmas. Now, perhaps we're being unfairly cynical, but another possibility that's hard to ignore is the plausible deniability of doing that and then saying afterwards, of course my fibers are on her clothing, didn't you see what I did? So what do you guys think about this area of the Ramsey case? Quite interesting. Would you like us to examine these possibilities in more detail? Let me know. As I say, I am running down, there's not really much more to talk about. In a sense, we've been speaking about a whole bunch of things, but if you'd like me to talk about this, we can still do that. Now, we especially want to look through Patsy's responses to these questions, when she was interrogated by the cops. So if you'd like me to do that, we can. And that brings us to what is my opinion on the split between the Boulder PD and the DA? And which side am I? Well, I would say Boulder PD were too focused on the Ramseys, in the sense that they were wrongly focused on the Ramseys. Arendt was, remember, she was focused on John. And Steve Thomas, I think he was a lot better, but also ultimately, I think, on the wrong track with the wrong focus. But they were right, in my opinion, based on some of the evidence, to focus to some extent on the Ramseys. And they were right based on the evidence to wanted to go further to the grand jury. The district attorney's office, on the other hand, I feel were too focused on how this was making them look. And you hear it all the time that Boulder PD lacked experience investigating homicides. Well, if Boulder PD lacked experience, the DA's office was even more inexperienced simply taking cases to trial, let alone big murder cases. And so my opinion is that the district attorney's office weren't focused enough on the merits of the case. They were second-guessing too much. Instead, they were too focused on being, I feel, embarrassed within a public spectacle. They were wrong, in my opinion, to feel that there wasn't enough evidence in June 1998 to take the case to a grand jury, and they were wrong not to allow those grand jury indictments to stand in, October 1999. In the Scott Peterson case, and I wrote 3 books on that case, just think about the evidence in that case. Just a single hair caught in the yellow needle-nose pliers that was found in the boat, that wasn't even positively linked to Lacey, but that was the sum total of evidence. And look at what happened in that case. Scott Peterson was convicted. There wasn't a lot of actual evidence, but there certainly was a certain amount of circumstantial evidence and a lot of hinky behavior surrounding that. The affair he was having, going fishing on Christmas Day and all of that kind of thing. By comparison, though, the Ramsey case had so much more evidence. All the items sourced from inside the home, the body found inside the home, the ransom note alone is a huge piece of evidence. The ransom note alone, I don't think proves Patsy wrote it, but what happens if you add the fibers to those potentialities? And that's the area we want to take this analysis into in the next 1 or 2 episodes, right? There's also plenty of circumstantial evidence in the Ramsey case. Of course, it doesn't help if you get lost in the hurricane of information, so much so that you can't make any sense of it. And I do think that this has happened with many of the investigators and also the prosecutors. Or worse, that you're so afraid that you're going to come off in a courtroom looking lost that you don't want to do certain things that perhaps you should. And of course, that would be easy to do in this case. So I'm not going to take it further than that, but I think we do need to look at what did Patsy say when she was asked about her clothing during the police interview in 1998, and I do think we should look at that. What do you guys think? And so that will be the subject of our next episode. Thank you for listening. I hope you've had a great weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.